Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the postgame pod for the Wolves' close loss to the Nuggets. We'll talk about what was most impressive about a shorthanded, road-weary Wolves team nearly pulling off an upset. We'll talk about Jaden McDaniels' bounce-back game and Anthony Edwards' big third quarter. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. This is the postgame podcast from a disappointing yet still encouraging Timberwolves loss. I know there's no moral victories, especially not in late March, but have to feel good about how the Wolves competed on Tuesday in a one-possession loss to the best team in the Western Conference, the Denver Nuggets, and defending champions. So a lot to break down here in this game. First, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. A reminder about the postcast. If you missed it live last night, of course, you can hear it. It's the episode before this one on the Locked On Wolves audio feed. But we go live after each and every Wolves game over on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. And I say we, it's usually Luke Inman hosting and Jack Borman or Tyler Metcalf from Canis Hoopus as the guest analyst on the show. And we have rapid reaction to all the biggest moments with the Wolves on the Locked On Wolves postcast. Again, Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, and then the audio feed here at Locked On Wolves if you can't catch the show live. All right. So the Wolves come into this game, obviously shorthanded. Right. That seemed like there was a legit chance that Rudy Gobert was going to play. He did not play, still out with the rib injury out about a week. You had a full strength Nuggets team, the regular starting lineup. And Timberwolves also, of course, don't have Karl-Anthony Towns. So, and Ant was questionable with the finger dislocation / sprain after his detonation over John Collins in Salt Lake City on Monday night. So the Wolves were, I don't recall what the line was. I think they were 8.5 point underdogs on FanDuel, if I remember correctly. And then you add in the travel disadvantage. The Wolves were coming home after playing a 6-game road trip and the second night of a back-to-back after playing at altitude on Monday night. Denver was waiting for Minnesota in Minnesota. So a rest and travel disadvantage. A pretty clear health disadvantage. And here we are. The Wolves, sure enough, fall down 7 early. They fall down by, they're down 18 at halftime. 15 at halftime. They trailed in this game by as many as 18, though. And it really felt like they weren't going to have a shot in the second half. Now, the offense was fine early. It was more about the defense. The defense gave up 70 points in the first half to Denver. And obviously the Nuggets are an incredible team. But 70 points is too much to give up in a half, even without Rudy Gobert. I mean, Nuggets are what? They're, I think, 7th in offensive rating currently in the league. And what the Wolves tried to do, it didn't really matter what they tried to do with Jokic, but the Wolves have actually always been a pretty good matchup for Jokic because of their size and physicality. Well, the Wolves started Kyle Anderson at center in this game, which I talked a little bit about on Tuesday's show that I thought they might do. I remember he played a fair amount of center toward the end of his time in Memphis against the Wolves even. He played some center when Memphis would go small against Minnesota late in that season. And I thought that was a legitimate possibility, but I also thought that maybe they would lean a little bit more on Luka Garza against the size of Jokic. And they did as the game wore on. In fact, Kyle Anderson only played 4 more minutes than Luka Garza in this game, but slow-mo started. The Wolves tried to throw bodies at Jokic, and for the most part, though, we're encouraging him to try and beat them as a scorer, which he obviously can do, and he did. He scored a ton of points early, finished with 35 points on 22 shots, didn't actually have an assist until the fourth quarter of this game, and finished with only 2 assists. I mean, Jokic, what does he average? I think he averages over he averages 9 assists per game this year. And for his career, 7 assists per game. Obviously, that's what he's known for is his passing. The offense runs through Jokic. I mean, he's obviously known for more than his passing. He's known for a lot of things. But the offense runs through Jokic. And yet he was comfortable being the highest usage guy on that Nuggets roster in this game. He shot the ball 22 times. Nobody else shot it more than 15 and only had 2 assists. And again, not a single assist for Jokic until the fourth quarter. But he was happy to score the ball when the Wolves dared him to, if you will. He did. He was successful in doing it. The Wolves found themselves down 15 at halftime. And I can't necessarily fault what the Wolves were trying to do. I actually think overall, except for the porousness, except for how porous their defense was inside. Like Jokic was obviously beating smaller guys one-on-one. He was also making mid-range jumpers. He was beating smaller guys one-on-one in the post, I should say, and going fast enough that, and not that Jokic ever goes like super fast, but fast enough that the double teams couldn't really successfully come. And the Nuggets also had good ball movement. I mean, again, 35 points in the first quarter, 35 in the second, 70 in the first half for Denver. And Minnesota's paint defense was non-existent. For the game, Denver actually only ended up beating Minnesota by 4 in terms of points in the paint because Minnesota got really aggressive as the game wore on and actually clamped down a little bit defensively in the second half. And also, the offense was always there all game long for Minnesota. They never really had any issues scoring. They scored at least 27 points in each quarter. And it's because they were able to score in the paint. I mean, the Nuggets have some good perimeter defenders. Obviously, Aaron Gordon, Porter Jr., Caldwell Pope can be good on the perimeter as well. But they don't have size besides Jokic. And while Jokic is a solid defender, he's not exactly a rim protector. Or he's, not in the same way that a traditional rim protector would be, right? So Ant and others were actually able to do quite a bit of damage in the paint in this game. The Wolves' biggest problem offensively is they just missed 3-pointers. And they finished shooting 34% for 3, which still is not good, but it was like sub 30% for the vast majority of the game until they got really hot late. It wasn't quite too little too late because they had a shot to tie the game at the buzzer, of course, on that Ant 3-point attempt. But it was when they were down multiple possessions in the final minute, all of a sudden they were making all their threes. That was a major problem in this game because, again, the offensive flow was good for Minnesota. The points of the paint were good. They got to the line a fair amount. They just missed their open 3-point attempts. And that was really kind of the difference in this game. Again, the points in the paint were so bad early, but Minnesota battled back to being within 4 there. Fast break points. The Wolves actually did not have an advantage there either, which surprised me a little bit. Both these teams play slow, but the version of the Wolves without Karl-Anthony Towns has been playing much faster. We talked about that on the show before. They have been playing faster without Cat, and it's not necessarily because Cat likes to play slow. It's for a couple of reasons. One, it is easier to run when you've got less bigs on the floor, period, even though Cat is also good in transition. And two, they need to play a higher variance game offensively because the half-court offense just isn't as good, and it is more predictable with no Karl-Anthony Towns. So the Wolves are basically have said, how do we get easy buckets? Well, you get out in transition, you shoot a lot of threes. And in this game, neither thing really worked, right? They only had 9 fast break points, and they only made 12 threes on 35 attempts, 34.3% from deep. The Nuggets were 14-27 from 3. The Nuggets are overall, they actually have the lowest volume of 3-point attempts in the entire league. They're dead last in 3-point rate, but they're 11th in percentage. The Wolves have inched up into the middle of the pack in terms of rate, 3-point rate, but they're like 4th in percentage. So this was a bit of an anomaly for the Wolves in terms of how they shot 3-pointers and how they've been shooting here of late in a bad way. The Nuggets did what you'd expect, low volume, but they made their 3-point attempts. They took high quality attempts and made them. Porter Jr. hit a couple of tough ones, but Jokic was deadly, 3 of 4 from outside the arc. The Wolves dared him to shoot those late in this game in the fourth quarter. And it was like every time the Wolves got to within 3, Jokic hit a 3 is what it felt like. And I think at least 2 of his 3 threes were exactly that situation. I want to talk, I got a few key takeaways overall. And I don't know there's much else to say about the game flow overall. The Wolves had a massive third quarter, which I do want to talk a little bit more about. And Ant had a chance to tie the game on the 3-pointer at the buzzer and missed. They went the length of the court in 4 seconds. Caldwell Pope falls over, I think, trying to take a charge for whatever reason in that situation. It's not like the refs they're not going to call that. And they're also not going to call you for a foul on a 3-pointer unless it's egregious in that type of situation either. and Ant just simply missed it. It seemed like he fumbled the ball when he went to pick it up, kind of double clutched it, and then just short armed the three basically. But anyway, I want to talk third quarter. I want to talk Jaden McDaniels, and I want to talk about the Wolves bench and the true overall positives from this game. There's something interesting about the Wolves bench in this game that I don't know if you noticed, but I want to highlight what the Wolves did exactly based on who their bench was and what their bench provided in this game. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. As you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars today, actually. So I don't know, set your alarm for today at March 20th, Wednesday at 6 Central, 7 Eastern for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Today at 6, be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, today at 6 Central, 7 Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, let's talk third quarter in this one. The Wolves didn't necessarily do anything all that different in the third quarter, except for they just played harder, and really not just harder. Not like they weren't playing hard in the first half, but the effort level appeared to go up a little, and certainly the physicality went up on the defensive end of the floor. They gave up 70 first half points, 35 in each of the first two quarters, and then gave up less than half of what they'd given up in either of the first two quarters in the third. Only 17 points allowed in the third quarter. And they were simply more physical. And the officials let them play. And this is exactly why I think this Wolves team could be better in the playoffs than they are on the regular season. Because if there's a level of physicality, and it almost felt like the officials were like, all right, this is two of the best four teams in the entire NBA. Let's just let them go at it. And they swallowed the whistle on both ends for the most part. And for the game, they didn't necessarily. The officiating was good. But other than all the overturned out of bounds calls, because that's now a theme where there's two or three of these in a game where the officials clearly get them wrong, and then the teams have to waste their challenges on them. But anyway, the Wolves' physicality was ratcheted up, and it started with the starters. But Luka Garza brought some physicality off the bench as well. Obviously, McLaughlin was his typical active self. I think across the board, the Wolves just got in the jerseys of the Nuggets and made their lives more difficult. And then on the flip side, Anthony Edwards got real hot. And he had a good first half, but he had an outstanding third quarter. And was scoring over double teams, was, for the most part, the defense wasn't giving him anything, but taking these slivers that the defense did allow him to have, these slivers of daylight. And also moved the ball really well when he was crowded. I mean, he finished with 8 assists and 3 turnovers. I thought Ant did a pretty good job with his decision-making in this game. And they needed him to come through scoring-wise in the third quarter, and he did. Across the board, it was just a really strong quarter, and Minnesota found themselves down just 3 going into the fourth. They took some brief leads early in the fourth quarter of this game. Ultimately, down the stretch, it was just, Ant didn't score in the fourth. And that was a huge deal. And it was just because Denver, instead of kind of like faking it, the faux double team where somebody comes kind of halfway there, they were straight up sending 2 at the ball. And there were a couple times where Ant just made the decision to beat late, and the Nuggets, credit them. Their defensive rotations, like the Nuggets recently became a top 10 defensive team in terms of defensive rating. They're flying around. I talked earlier about how they have some good perimeter defenders, but not like real true paint protectors. Those guys can rotate. Those guys can cover for each other. They can scramble with anybody. And it was impressive to see them when they would load up on Ant and still recover and at least get off reasonable contests against the Wolves 3-point shooters. And the Wolves missed a lot of open and semi-open threes, period, in this game. Again, the only reason they shot 34% is because they made some impossible threes. Conley, McDaniels, Ant late in the game when they absolutely needed, or I guess not Ant, mostly Conley and McDaniels, when they needed a bucket down the stretch, when they needed threes, and the Nuggets knew they were taking threes, and they still had two hands in their face. Like, that's when the Wolves actually made those shots. But over the course of the game, when they were open or semi-open off of these rotations, when the Nuggets would send two at Ant, the Wolves just missed some of those shots, and that really killed them. That was kind of the theme of the third and early fourth quarter. The Wolves just couldn't get the offense rolling when they were getting stops, and they did fine. The Jokic minutes, I think they were, or the non-Jokic minutes, I think they were -2 in the non-Jokic minutes in the first half. And I think they were slightly positive in the non-Jokic minutes in the second half, which is obviously what you have to do against Denver. Jokic ended up playing 38 minutes in this game, and the Wolves basically matched that, I think, minute for minute. With they both Ant and Jokic played 38 minutes. So all that to say, let's get to some key takeaways here. Number one, the Timberwolves were playing. The Timberwolves bench featured 4 guys who a month ago were not in the rotation. I guess call it 5 weeks because of the trade deadline. Not only were they not in the rotation, but 2 of them weren't on the team. And Garza may as well have not been on the team. He's on a 2-way deal, and he hadn't played any rotation minutes until Utah on Monday night. Seriously, go back 5 weeks. TJ Warren, Luka Garza, Monte Morris, and Jordan McLaughlin were the only players to see time off the bench for the Wolves in this game. Those guys were either not on the team or not in the rotation 5 weeks ago. And you had Garza and Morris both playing over 20 minutes. McLaughlin played 19. And, your starting lineup features 3 guys who are supposed to be part of that bench rotation, or 2 guys, I guess, in Kyle Anderson and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You're going toe-to-toe against the defending champs who they have their full rotation, right? These are all guys who contributed to a championship team last year. To a person, right? And factor in all the travel stuff, the tough back-to-back I mentioned earlier. That's a really impressive performance from Minnesota. It really was. And I know there's no moral victories, and we said this all the time when the Wolves were bad a few years ago, and for most of the last 30 years. But I think you can take a little bit of a moral victory from this one. It would have been great. It would have been so sweet to pull this out and to guarantee that you at least tie in the season series and that you're not going to lose a tiebreaker to Denver. Now you get 2 more cracks at it, but it just, I think, reinforces to the Wolves, hey, we could beat this Nuggets team. We played them tough in the playoffs and the regular season last year. We beat them at full strength earlier this season. And now we played them to a 1-possession game and a chance to tie at the buzzer without 2 of our best 3 players. The Timberwolves know they can beat this Nuggets team, and this game only furthered that notion for Minnesota, and should make fans feel pretty confident about that too. I'm not saying that the Wolves, the Nuggets are still the Nuggets, right? A series against them would at least go 6 games. It would be a just knockout, drag-out fight. It absolutely would be. But in terms of the matchups in the West, as we talked about before, the Nuggets aren't the worst one for Minnesota, right? I'm not saying I'd rather face Dallas than Phoenix or sorry, not Dallas. I'm not saying I'd rather face Denver than Phoenix or Sacramento in a series, but I think the Wolves actually match up a little bit better in terms of the personnel, and it gives them more than a fighting chance in a series against Denver. And this game just kind of, I think, reinforced that. So that's kind of a 2-in-1. The bench, the inexperienced, at least for the Wolves bench, plus you're showing heart, toughness, et cetera, on a back-to-back. Overall physicality, which I guess is also related, but the Wolves were physical. They were, and they lost on the glass because they were severely undersized. They were a -12 on the glass. They lost points in the paint by 4. And it would have been great if they had turned Denver. I didn't mention this already or yet. I should have. Denver had 17 turnovers in this game, and Minnesota managed to score 28 points off those 17 turnovers, but only 9 fast break points for this game. The Wolves didn't run quite enough, and I've talked about this before. The Wolves have the most efficient offense in the league when they run after turnovers, but they run the least. So they just got to run more. They got to force the issue a bit more. We've seen that post Karl-Anthony Towns injury, but we didn't see enough of it in this game. Let's see. Final takeaways. Oh, Jaden McDaniels. We'll talk about him in studs and duds, but I want to tip this off. Jaden came through in a big way after really being hardly on the floor over the past few games, frankly, and not turning in a good offensive game since like right after the All-Star break. This was a really, really good Jaden McDaniels performance. It was good to see. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next. And also my last takeaway, if the Wolves just simply make threes at the clip that they usually do, they win this game most likely. Right? They lost by 3 and they attempted 8 more threes than Denver, but they made 2 less threes. Just 34% from 3 in this game for Minnesota. This is a team that, even including this game, they're almost 39% from 3 for the season as a team. 4th best mark in the league. But you have Ant 3 of 8's kind of on par with what you'd expect. Alexander Walker goes 0 for 4, which is unusual. Conley goes 1 for 4. Now, Garza shot 8 of the Wolves' 35 threes and made 2 of them, which is, maybe you'd expect him to make 3 out of 8 based on his track record as a shooter. But still, the volume of threes was there. It pretty in line, actually a little bit more than what they averaged per game this year. It's just they didn't quite make enough. If 1 or 2 more of those fall, there's a different result in this game. All right, let's talk individual studs and duds. I want to spend a little bit of extra time on Jaden McDaniels. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure might be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. It has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, let's close with studs and duds here today. Let's start with Jaden McDaniels. I know Ant had a great game. We'll talk about Ant. We already did a little bit, but let's start with Jaden. Jaden had 26 and 6 in this game on 9 of 13 shooting, 4 of 6 outside the arc, 4 of 7 at the line. I said, and I wasn't joking, at the end of the game in Utah on Monday night, that three-pointer that Jaden made when they were up 7, and he just launched it from right above the break in front of the Wolves bench to make the Wolves, to propel the Wolves, if you will, to a 10-point win instead of a 7-point win. None of the Jazz players liked it. The crowd booed. Some of the coaches on the Wolves bench didn't look like they liked it. But I said on the show on Tuesday, hey, I wonder if that gets Jaden going, because he had a bad game in Utah, right? Like what was he? 4 of 13 shooting. He had missed his first 4 threes. But that type of a play, it clearly jump-started him. Seeing the ball go through the basket there, a walk-off of sorts. I mean, they were going to win the game anyway, but a walk-off of sorts for Jaden had to have provided a confidence boost. How else do you explain him going 0 for 4 from 3 in that game? And he had missed what? Let's see. I'm doing the math real quick. His last 20 3-pointers. He missed 20 straight 3-pointers. And actually, I think he missed his last couple in Cleveland the game before that. We're going back now 2.5 weeks since the last time Jaden had made a 3-pointer until he hit that 3 at the end of the game against Utah. He had missed 20 plus straight. Hits that 3 at the end of the game, meaningless 3, and then goes 4 of 6 against Denver, 9 of 13 from the floor, 6 rebounds, 2 blocks, in a little bit of foul trouble, but still ends up to play 38 minutes, or still ends up playing 38 minutes. He was in a bit of, actually, no, I guess it was Slimo that got in the early foul trouble. He ended up with 5 fouls, but he paced himself well enough that he was able to tie with Ant for the team high in minutes in this game. A well-rounded Jaden game. He was good defensively. The Jamal Murray assignment, I mean, it was split up a little bit. Murray had 18 points, but it took him 14 shots to do it. Yes, he had 11 assists, but it wasn't Jamal Murray that beat the Wolves, right? It was Jokic, and then playing off of that, it was Michael Porter hit a couple of tough threes. It was mostly that. He had a couple of some tough twos in the fourth quarter as well. But it wasn't Jamal Murray that beat the Wolves. And, McDaniels obviously had a hand in that. I thought it was a really, really encouraging Jaden McDaniels performance. Also, to see him get to the line 7 times, he got aggressive when the Wolves needed him, when Ant was off the floor, going into the paint. He had actually 2 big dunks. He had one near big dunk that he was fouled on and got to the line. A well-rounded, impressive Jaden performance. And I mentioned earlier that it had been like 3 weeks since he'd scored anything near this, and that's true. He hasn't scored double figures since the Lakers game 10 days ago. And he hadn't scored over 20 points since he scored 26 in the overtime loss to Sacramento on March 1st, which will be, 3 weeks ago Friday. Since the All-Star break, he'd only scored in double figures. This is the sixth time since the All-Star break he scored in double figures. And remember, he had struggled right before the All-Star break, and he had that big game against Portland when they won, on that 4-game winning streak to go into the All-Star break. But he's been pretty quiet. I talked about the 20-plus straight missed three-pointers, and even some of those games where he got to double figures. So like that Lakers game, remember, he was 0-5 from 3 in that game, and that kind of started that streak of missing shots, of missing threes. But he also had 17 shots to get to 10 points because the Lakers were daring him to score. They were playing off of him. And that was kind of when things started to spiral for Jaden. I'm really hoping he can stack positive performances. Starting with that made three, the meaningless made three late against Utah, the next night to play this well against the defending champs. Now you get 2 nights off. Hopefully he doesn't lose that, and he can maintain that confidence going into Friday's game. I think that's a real possibility for Jaden, and here's hoping that he can do that. Other studs, of course, Anthony Edwards, 30 points on 26 shots. I know he didn't score in the fourth. I know he missed the potential game time 3, but they're not in that position if Ant doesn't go off in the third quarter. 30 points, 8 assists, 8 rebounds. 30 points, 8 assists, 8 rebounds, 2 steals, only 3 turnovers, despite the Nuggets loading up on him constantly. A couple of them were bad, right? He dribbled the ball off his foot. I think when the game was tied late third quarter, tried to cross over a double team between the legs, dribbled off the base of his foot, and it rolled away, and I think the Nuggets hit a 3 off of that. That was a bad turnover, right? Like those are going to happen when you have that many guys coming at you, and I don't, it was still a good Ant performance. I don't really have a problem with how he played. I thought he involved his teammates just fine. I'm going to give. This is a tough one between Kyle Anderson and Mike Conley. I'm going to go Kyle Anderson because I think his task in this game was much more challenging and he was more consistent throughout. He was physical enough, especially in that third quarter. 12 points on 5 and 9 for slow-mo. He didn't attempt a 3. All of his attempts were like between 10 and 15 feet, right around the free throw line and the elbows. And he went on a little bit of a mini run himself, hit a nice baseline floater where he played well in this game. 4 assists, no turnovers, 2 blocks and a steal. It was kind of a typical slow-mo game, albeit at the 5 that you would have seen from him, last year. Now, obviously playing the 5, you'd love for him to get more than 3 rebounds. Didn't happen, but I think he was great everywhere else. It's tough for him to go up against the athleticism and size of Porter and the size and skill of Jokic, certainly. But a good performance from slow-mo. Mike Conley was also good. He didn't score until, I don't think he scored at all in the first half. And he came to the party a little bit in the second half, was actually the only Timberwolves player with a positive plus-minus, which I thought was interesting. A +10. Nobody else had better than a 0 in this game. Conley had 13 points on 3 of 7 shooting, did a little bit of damage in the paint late, hit a like a weird little kind of fadeaway 12, 14-foot jumper, which we don't see a lot of from Mike in the mid-range. But a good Conley game. You just love for him to come to the party a little bit earlier. He was actually tied for second on the Wolves in rebounds with 6, kind of snuck in and grabbed some long rebounds several times in this game, including 2 offensive rebounds. Had 5 assists and a steal and 2 turnovers for Conley. All right. I don't have any duds. I thought everyone played well. Garza gave you something off the bench. Yeah, you'd love for him to hit 1 or 2 more threes, but I thought he was physical enough, played well. TJ Warren played better than he has recently. Did miss an open 3 late. That would have been a big shot with his weird line drive 3-point shot. But he scored 6 points, did knock down a 3 in the first half in 9 minutes. Monte Morris was good against his former team, and Jordan McLaughlin, wasn't as good as he was certainly in Utah, but I thought played fine. This was a good performance for Minnesota. It just was. I know they lost. It was a good performance. You can still have a good performance in a loss. And, other than the first half defense, nothing about this game raises alarm bells for me. And I thought Minnesota played well overall. Next up, the Wolves have the next 2 nights off. So Thursday will be, we'll take us. I want to talk a little about the ownership stuff. There's some ownership news that came out. We'll talk about that Thursday. We'll take a step back and look at some of the post Karl-Anthony Towns numbers that the Wolves have had. since the injury. And then they take on the Cavs Friday night. So Friday we'll preview that matchup. That's another NBA TV game Friday night at 7 p.m. Wolves Cavs. And then that will be game 2 of what's a 4-game homestand. So lots to come still this week. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.